Welcome to episode 12 of In the Hot Seat. I'm your co-host, Michael Fauscette, and I'm here with Pete Smith. So what's in the hot seat? Well, every 2 weeks, we get together with some industry expert or seller, customer for a discussion, a debate, and some discourse around how we humanize the digital experience. And so all aspects of the customer life cycle are up for grabs, as well as the technology that underlies each phase of the customer journey. So if you if you're on LinkedIn Live, you may find that there's still a bug that will cause your show to just loop continuously. And if you love seeing us in loop for the first 5 minutes of the show, you can leave it there. Or if you want, you can go to YouTube or Facebook and it'll solve that problem. And it's a known bug, and hopefully we'll get it resolved over time. But YouTube, Facebook, no issues with that.
Yep. So this is the fourth episode in a 5-part series on enterprise sales productivity. And I want to take just a minute to define what I mean by those last 3 words, enterprise sales productivity. So by enterprise, we mean companies who are in the process of making a decision as to whether or not to buy a product or solution. So we aren't referring to the process of just acquiring more of what you already have. I mean, pretty soon, the purchasing department will just be able to tell Siri or Alexa to buy more of what they already have. If that can't already happen, I can't keep up with how fast these things are changing anymore. So that maybe that's already happening. I don't know, but we're more focused on sort of complex sales, solution sales. So that's the first word. The second word is sales, and sales used to refer to salespeople. And, over the last 20, 30 years, there's been an increasing need for all kinds of other customer-facing resources to help sell these complex products. So they could be sales engineers or application specialists or industry consultants or customer success managers. So when we talk about sales in this context, we're referring to all these participants in this sales process. And then the last word was productivity. And what Mike and I mean by that in this context is not the number of sales calls that a salesperson makes, but revenue generation. So that's the focus of our discussion today. And our guest is going to help us better understand what enterprise sales organizations can do to actually move the revenue needle.
So Pete, over the last, year probably, I've looked at a lot of data around sales productivity, and some of it is disturbing, to say the least. I know I saw a Forbes article last year that said in 2021, 53% of sales reps made their quota. And then there's just kind of a general decline across, and you mentioned metrics, open rates and response rates and win rates. All those things have started to decay over time, and you see a lot of sales teams that are just trying to do more and more and more and more and more to compensate for the fact that things don't seem to be working as well as they were. And honestly, job satisfaction dropped too, right? It's tenures down less than 18 months. And if you consider that takes, about 9 months to get a rep fully productive, you literally only have 9 months or less of productivity out of those reps that you're investing so much money in. And job satisfaction's been going down as well. And in fact, in a sales Insight Labs survey last year, 61% of the salespeople surveyed said that sales was harder now than it was 5 years ago. So it seems like there's a significant problem brewing underneath this whole issue of productivity.
Yeah, and you were just saying more and do more and more and more of the same thing you have been doing. It's sort of almost like the definition of insanity, right? So one of the questions I think we need to ask is that whether the traditional way of thinking about the enterprise sales process is broken too. So here's an example of an enterprise sales process that resides in more or less this sort of form across any CRM system you can find. So I just wanted to ask you, Michael, is there anything that sticks out as obsolete thinking as you look at this model?
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of things that stick out to me as obsolete thinking on this one. I've been on a warpath against customer journey mapping as an exercise for a while, just because I simply think the idea is broken, right? It's not a map. There's no such thing as a linear journey for a customer that's trying to engage with you. And I would say anymore, but maybe it was always true. I don't know. But certainly with the level of information that's available to people these days. The idea that they're just going to come and follow exactly what you want them to do, um, that's just not a reasonable idea. In fact, most of the information, most of the research, all of that kind of comes on their own because there's so many sources of information. And if you think about the sales process, there's sort of traditional systems and there's kind of a new way to think of systems. And I used to think of it as some systems manage and some systems do, or in this case, systems of record or systems of reporting. Those are important, like Salesforce automation. You need it to be linear and structured because you're trying to forecast off of it. You're trying to, to track progress in your sales team and your revenue. So, you know, that's one thing. But if on the other side of this, if you're trying to do something, what you really need are systems of execution or systems of action. And that's technology that helps the seller do something better. So it helps them be more productive and more effective. The second thing that jumps out to me is that several of these things are not discrete steps, and it's particularly true of discovery. The idea that I'm going to come in and I'm going to spend an hour with you on the phone, and now I know everything about you, and I can, recommend the right solution for your problem, and blah blah. That's ridiculous. Um, the Brevet Group did a study, and they found that only 13% of buyers felt like sales reps understood their needs. Or I could flip that around and say 87% of the sales reps they were dealing with had no idea what the customer needed.
So you're saying that there's still some room for improvement. Is that your that's your
I
take?
say there's a tiny bit of room for improvement there.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Good. Yeah, I'm always interested in this um, uh, sort of that exact topic in terms of where discovery is. How does it change throughout the buying cycle? Is there better places to ask certain questions along this quote unquote journey? Just sort of the science of discovery. Let me throw up another graphic real quick. And this is probably a little difficult to see, but the main point here is that if you look at all of those sort of steps to execute a sale, not forecast one, but to actually do the work, it's to me it's all questions. Every single step of the path has this information component in there, and the only place that this data exists for a specific opportunity is in the mind of the individual buyers. This isn't on the website at JP Morgan saying they want to buy XYZ. And the complexity of what you have to manage is considerable. And the other thing I think that's interesting about this and what makes it sort of nonlinear is that, especially from a discovery standpoint, you're in multiple phases simultaneously. And that's not even including as you add more and more buyers, more and more stakeholders. That's again, then the sales process becomes almost recursive. I'm starting again at the sort of an earlier part of the sales process with this new stakeholder that I hadn't talked to before. So let's move on to our guest. Peter Cohan is the founder and principal of The Second Derivative and author of two great books. The first is Great Demo, and the second one is named Doing Discovery. The bulk of Peter's experience is with complex enterprise software and strategic systems sold to a variety of audiences and a range of vertical markets. And he has had roles in technical and product marketing, marketing management, sales and sales management, the C-suite, as well as board of directors. So he really has a wealth of experience across basically every job you could have in this space. So welcome, Peter.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Well, welcome, Peter. You were sitting backstage for this. I guess that's a virtual backstage anyway, for our little banter discussion at the beginning. So I'm just curious, before we kind of get into it a little bit, what do you think about what we were just talking about around productivity and the link between discovery and sales effectiveness?
So I was really taken by some of the statistics you guys mentioned. I think the first one was that, what was it? 42% of all statistics are made up. No, that's anyway. No, the
I think it's higher.
87%, exactly. That it was at 13% of all salespeople understand their prospects from the perspective of the prospect. Is that correct? That means, I'm seeing a head nod. So that means that 1 out of 8 salespeople get it, if you will. I would consider that to be frighteningly appalling.
Yes.
So, the question then is, why is that happening? And I would have to submit, because discovery is insufficient. It would be like, one of you guys don't feel particularly well, and after a week of whining and moaning, you finally are convinced to go to a hospital and see a doctor. And the doctor doesn't ask you any questions. The doctor just says, hey, you know what? Go down to the pharmacy, try one of everything there, and let me know what works. And that's a modern sales process, which is clearly broken. So that would be my initial response to that. 1 out of 8, that's frightening.
And Peter, when you go in, you do discovery consulting with your business as part of what you do. And when you go into these clients, what's this current state? I mean, do you have to convince people that discovery is a good idea, or do they understand that they just don't know how to do it? Or what's your experience?
So it's a no and yes. Let's start with the back cover of this book, because the little story on the back cover is what prompted me to finally sit down and draft this. And it was a conversation that I was having, a discovery conversation I was having with a head of sales just a couple of years ago. And at one point I asked him, what percent of your team would you say does a good job doing discovery? And he just immediately responds. He says, about 1 out of 5, 20%. And I thought for a moment, and I said, what percent of your team believes they do a good job in discovery, but they really don't? And he says, hang on, let me close my door. And I hear this thunk, 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 and then ka-chunk. And then he comes back, he says, yeah, it's the other 80%. They don't know what they don't know. They are victims of Dunning-Kruger. They are standing firmly atop what Dunning-Kruger calls Mount Stupid. They've learned just enough to believe, they've learned just enough to believe that they are highly competent when they are actually frighteningly incompetent. They're, what is that stage 1, unconsciously incompetent, if you will. So that's partly what caused me to draft the book. Does that help to begin to answer the question? I've got another data point I want to share with you, though, too.
Yeah, please.
Sure.
So I just drafted an article on this because how often in the world of sales do you hear sales management and salespeople saying, hey, I need help for my team, or I want to get help learning how to overcome objections? How often would you gentlemen say you hear that request? I need help overcoming objections.
Yeah, every day.
Well, every day. And
right.
I started thinking about this a number of years ago, and I ended up drafting an article that effectively says, perhaps we're looking at the wrong problem. Instead of trying to overcome objections, maybe we should understand why objections arise in the first place. And my hypothesis, I'd love to see some data from Gong or some other organization on this, but my hypothesis is the root causes are, number 1, insufficient discovery, and number 2, poor demo skills. So, you could almost take any objection that occurs and map it back to one of those two things. So Thoughts or comments on that, gentlemen? I didn't mean to turn the tables on the discussion here.
No, no, it's good. It's good. And I think, as I think about this, surveys that I've done, I've been doing buyer behavior surveys for quite a while and trying to really understand what the buyer side of this looks like. And one of the things that buyers tell you, of course, they don't want to be contacted when you're not relevant or contextual, but they do want to be contacted when you're relevant and contextual to what's going on for them. And if you take that a little further, that they always tell you that what they look for is somebody they can trust, somebody that understands them and they can build a trust relationship with. So I'm just thinking, this seems obvious to me that discovery, or whatever you want to call it, it's the ability to understand the customer's problems and the fit of your solution and what might solve their problem. And I'm just, why is that so hard for people to connect? It just seems like it's something we struggle with and have struggled with for years.
I think part of the answer is, prior to perhaps me writing this book, no one has adequately defined what is discovery. How do you know you've had enough? I hear people say all the time, discovery is a journey. Discovery should never be considered complete. Well, I don't disagree with that, but I would say you've got to have a few destinations on that journey in order to know where you are and whether or not you've reached that destination. So, for example, I put forth a rubric of a great demo situation slide, which has 6 simple items in it that when they are complete, you have what I would call a demo qualified lead. In other words, a lead with sufficient information to be able to put together and deliver a credible technical proof demo, which effectively says, I understand your situation sufficiently that I can put together a demo to prove out these specific capabilities you said you're looking for to solve your problems. No guesswork. I know what you need. I know what you need. We can have a very, very productive meeting. So figure of merit is a clear set of defined answers to questions that represents one destination or one endpoint of discovery on that, if you will, overall journey. Yeah, so that'd be part one.
In that previous sort of funnel looking graphic we had up, what you're really talking about there from a demo standpoint is you're talking about sort of the conversion rate between whatever step it is you consider before demo, and that's based on discovery. I'm going to do a much more effective demo if I get a critical mass of understanding about what it is we're trying to achieve here. And I tend to think of it this exact same way across sort of every milestone, if you will, if you want to think of it that way, across this sort of sales or buying journey. There's a conversion opportunity, just like there is on a website, at every one of those, and they're information dependent, critically information dependent. Right?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges here is getting started. Very simply, buyers, how do I want to phrase this? I'm going to try to phrase this nicely. Having been and continue to be a prospect and a buyer, the last person I want to talk to, and I mean this literally, is a salesperson. Why? Because when I engage with a salesperson, I know he or she or they is going to try to sell me on whatever they have. And I am uncomfortable to get into that. And I'm a salesperson, so I get it. And I'm uncomfortable to get into that engagement until I'm ready to pursue and I'm in an active buying process. So stepping back from that, one of the ideas we teach is the concept of a vision generation demo, which is designed to enable an engagement to take place early in the process when the prospect first reaches out and says, hey, I just want to get an understanding of what you guys do. I just want to get an understanding of the art of the possible. So we teach a mechanism called a vision generation demo, which is designed to satisfy the prospect's desire to get a sense of what's possible, just enough demo to say, okay, I get it. And then if the prospect is willing and interested, to move them gently but firmly into a discovery conversation. So it's a quid pro quo activity, if you will. But the fundament is, buyers are reticent to engage until they feel that they are ready and in control. And that's one of the big paradigm shifts, I think, Pete, that you were showing in the, and Michael, you were showing in your the linear sales process graphic. Prospects are coming in way down here, and they're out of alignment with what the sales process would otherwise suggest. How does that resonate?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's it's definitely talks to that nonlinear idea that customers come in and out of your um, span of control or span of interaction over a period of time because they're doing their own research, they're on their own schedule, their own process to figure out their problem, right? And so, yeah, I think that to me is a big part of that linear thought is you can come in and out of that multiple times in every direction, and you'll never see a customer who comes in and just goes boom, 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 boom right down the thing and checks off your little boxes as they go.
If it's okay, I'd love to throw that graphic I love from your book so much, Peter, and have you speak a little bit to that about the discovery space. I'm a salesperson. I'm entering this scenario now where I've just done my bargain with the buyer, and he's ready to start down this discovery process with me. Can you just speak to how it is you talk to this slide?
So what I was trying to do with the slide is to sort of categorize different pieces of discovery or discovery output with their relative importance, and then where they might occur in a conversation. And so for a moment, I'm going to leave executives out of this because most executives will want to get to the point right away and not only admit pain right away, but then want to see action taken right away if they really want to solve it. So everybody else is what this is written or drawn for. So it starts off with, at the bottom left, the about you, demographics, and the environment. And these are questions and topics that are designed to be easy to ask, and even more importantly, for the prospect, easy to answer. They're designed to, if you will, warm you up. It's synonymous in a sense to when you go to the doctor and you don't feel good, but you don't see the doctor right away. First, you've got to go through and fill out all the forms, hopefully electronically, about your insurance and your history and any meds you're on and so forth. They take your vitals next. You go to a nurse's station. These are demographics equivalents. So tell me about your team. Tell me about their backgrounds. Tell me about questions that are easy to ask and easy to answer. And that then moves both parties more comfortably to begin to explore areas that are, let's say, less comfortable to talk about. Mm-hmm. So on the left side, most people are willing to admit pain pretty readily. So that's the major, top left. That's the major pains and related pains. Our Salesforce database, I think, Pete, it's you who said that, is inaccurate. What was your phrase for that? I love that quote.
I'm not allowed to say that in public anymore.
You're not allowed to say that in public.
Yeah, my attorney has suggested I just drop the whole topic.
Held you back.
Yeah.
I will say this obliquely, and I didn't hear it from Pete. That you're welcome. That CRM databases are perhaps the least accurate databases in the world today. I thought that was really clever. Anyway, people are willing to talk about major pains fairly early. However, you need to go a lot deeper and a lot more broad, or a lot broader. So on the top right is really where you're looking to head eventually. And that's to understand what are known as critical business issues, which are goals or objectives that are at risk. Now, why do I differentiate goals and objectives that are at risk versus pain? Because people will live with the pain that they know forever unless they have attached it to something that is more important, like an annual, quarterly, or project-based goal or objective that is at risk. So the pain, value, and timing elements are actually three critical elements to help avoid the dreaded no decision outcome, which we can come back to in a moment. Then on the bottom right, extended environment, culture, uniqueness, these are questions that give you some deep insights into your prospect, particularly for complex buying processes and selling processes and offerings, and insights that may be extraordinarily important in really going forward together successfully. So cultural questions can be as simple as, what kind of an adopter are you? Are you all at once? Do you implement in waves, for example? Are you a fast follower? All these things have very, very big impact on how you should be working with this particular prospect. Let me just pause there and ask questions, comments, thoughts, observations on that so far.
Well, I personally really like the idea of the easy to ask, easy to answer as a way to get started, because there's definitely a dynamic at play where customers will tell you a lot more once they trust you, right, than they will up front. So if you start with that data that you're looking for, because either that's the way you've been trained or it's just your natural reaction or whatever, you're definitely going to get much poorer information.
Actually, can we run a little experiment?
Sure.
Just say yes, because I'm going to do this anyway.
Right.
Michael, what's your background? How did you ascend to this position of power and authority in your organization?
My background was tech for many years, and then I've been a tech analyst for 17 years. From IDC, I ran the software group there, software apps group, and then I was the chief research officer at G2 before I started my research firm. And
what prompted you to launch the research firm?
I thought after spending some time with at G2 and really learning data and continuing to dig into buyer behavior more, I just thought there was an interesting opportunity to work with startups and other tech companies to help them more effectively understand and fill customer needs based on data. So try to incorporate data in everything that we do.
Interesting. Okay, perfect. So what just happened is actually what I recommend as one of the first portions of a discovery conversation. And it's about you is the way I phrase it. And I love the question. Before we dive in, tell me your background. And the reason that I recommend this is very, very simple. People are most comfortable talking about whom?
Yeah, themselves. Absolutely.
Themselves. Yeah, absolutely. And it gets the conversation started. And by the way, that's a key word. Conversation, not inquisition. It gets the conversation started. And I learn, or if you're doing this, you learn very, very valuable things about this person's background, about their education, about some of their driving forces, their interests, the timing that they spent. 17 years in the industry, wanted to do this, yourself, et cetera, et cetera. It kicks things off and it provides a basis for going forward. So this idea of questions that are easy to ask and more importantly, easy to answer for the prospect is a very, very strong piece of the methodology to support doing a discovery conversation.
Well, something
by the way, that worked. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Happy to be the experimental guest, I guess. No, so I was just thinking about something you said earlier, and this is something I've thought about off and on for a while, and it's this idea that reps tend to focus on what they want and what their company wants and what their company does. So it's kind of like sell what you have. We used to tell people that sell what you have. Don't sell the vision, sell the thing that's here. Well, that seems fine, except for the problem that we're talking about voice of the customer and how we get it into the process, because we're trying to solve their problem. And this is the shift, I think, right? We're trying to solve their problem, not trying to sell them something. And I just wonder, react to that. Does that make sense to you, getting voice of the customer in the sales process versus voice of the vendor, I guess is what we have there?
That you are singing my song. I'm a huge fan of what has been dubbed today buyer enablement, which is not just plotting the the prospect or customer journey, but rather is anticipating their needs and wants. That is sort of the way I look at it. Let me give you a couple of very, very simple examples. Discovery question. Dear prospect, have you ever purchased something like this before? Because if the answer is yes, well, then they're experienced and Your job now is to understand their process, map to it, and as I said, anticipate what they might need. Simple example, hey, if your prospect, most of our other customers required a privacy survey before we could move forward with a contract. Would it make sense to get that started now, for example? Oh yeah, good point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, I'll kick that off. Other side of the equation, prospect says, no, actually, this is my first time buying enterprise software. Oh, okay. As your as your salesperson, or perhaps as your coach, would you like some help on the kinds of things you're probably going to have to go through internally to help bring this, any product aboard, hopefully ours type of thing. So two different, very, very different elements of thought. It's not just asking the prospect in the traditional, sales process, what's your buying process? Where are you in your buying process? But it's a little bit, well, it's not a little bit, it's a lot more granular to understand, are you experienced or are you new? Along similar lines, people talk about your champion. Well, same thing. Is this a first-time champion who really needs some guidance and support and help on how to be a champion? Or is this somebody who has, purchased your stuff 3 times before and knows exactly how to get it done? So those are elements of discovery that can rather dramatically change the whole nature of the conversation. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely resonates. I think, that idea of really trying to gain the level of understanding to see, if you have a fit, if you can solve that problem, that's a better conversation all around. Yeah, interesting.
Peter, do you think that salespeople have like some sort of bias where they believe that if they do discovery, it's going to slow the sales process down?
Let's go back to your 1 out of 8. I would say that the best performers, the naturals, the eagles, they do it. They do it naturally. When they become sales management, they can't explain what they're doing because they've never had to do so. But in my experience, and it's limited, but the best salespeople tend to do discovery quite well. This goes back to our original discussion of, well, how much discovery is enough? What is discovery? I run into people all the time in sales and in enablement who equate discovery with qualification, with BANT, for example. And they'll say, oh yeah, well, we did a discovery call. And I said, well, good. Can you send me a recording? Give me a few examples. And what I hear in these discovery calls over and over and over is prospect admits pain. Vendor asked a few questions about the tech stack and the environment and required integrations. And then what do you think happens next?
They start talking and don't stop.
Corporate overview presentation, product overview presentation, and stunningly awful harbor tour demo. Stop me if you see anything you like so far.
Correct. Yeah, it's if I throw everything up on the screen, eventually you'll find something you want.
Exactly. So there's a huge gap between people this goes back to what I said, the 20% actually, do discovery well, but the other 80% not only don't do it well, but they don't know they don't do it well. They believe that they're doing what is sufficient, but it is insufficient. I love to do let me do a small example. I love to do a 2 doctors mini role play, which I will not force you guys to do now. But it basically, the output is as this. The first doctor says, hey, you got the flu. I'm going to prescribe Flubigon and go and get this prescription filled, and you should feel better in a couple of days. And that first doctor asked 0 questions. The patient came in and said, I think I have the flu. The doctor says, yeah, it's been going around. Here, get this filled. The second doctor, prospect or the patient feels uncomfortable and goes across town to another hospital. The second doctor asks a pile of questions. You have a temperature, how long have you had it? You're running, any sweats, nausea, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the kicker. At the end of that diagnostic session, that doctor number 2 prescribes exactly the same med, Flubigon. And then I ask the audience, well, which doctor are you more comfortable with? And the answer is always the same. It's doctor number 2. And I ask why? Because they ask questions, they invested time. And then I point out, both doctors came to exactly the same conclusion and the correct conclusion. But if you trust doctor number 2 because they executed discovery. So when people are asking the question, well, how much discovery is enough? I suggest that it is when 2 requirements are met. Number 1, when we, the vendor, or you, the vendor, have sufficient information to propose a precise and accurate solution. And number 2, when the prospect also feels comfortable that you've gathered enough information to be able to propose that solution. That's when discovery is sufficient. And that's what the methodology lays out.
And so back to, so you covered the effectiveness aspect of discovery. It makes a big difference in terms of your personal success. Do you have any thoughts on the acceleration of the deal or the slowing down of a deal for those top salespeople? So the ones that do discovery, does it actually speed up the sales process, or does it slow it down like maybe the bottom 80% think?
In my experience, it speeds it up in several different ways. So number 1, it's putting the hard portion at the beginning. So making sure the product fit is good, making sure that all the business issues are in alignment, making sure the capabilities are in alignment, making sure that the implementation desires and pathways are all in alignment. If you do that all up front, you will reduce the number of those dreaded things that I talked about earlier, objections and no decision outcomes. So number 1, I believe that is the case, and I would love to see metrics to track on that. But let's go back to those other 2 things. No decision outcomes, no decision results, where you as the vendor don't win, you don't lose to a competitor. The prospect decides to do nothing. My understanding is right now in enterprise software, that represents about 45% of all forecasted deals end up going nowhere. So by ruling those out early, you're able to then, well, everybody in the audience, if you're in sales or pre-sales and nearly half of the sales opportunities that you are engaged in go nowhere, would you like some of that time back in your lives? Everybody type yes with passion. So if you could reduce those even by half, that would mean that you could work another 25%, let's say, of opportunities, and with probably a higher probability of success. I think that then yields the kinds of results, Mike and Pete, that you're looking for. Does that all resonate?
Yeah. The thing that occurs to me is 2 things. First is a friend of mine says every deal that goes sideways is because of a lack of information. So I'm finding out in the 11th hour that we don't have a particular feature that somebody thought was important, and so I'm going to lose this deal. And so that ties sort of to my second idea of it's not that these deals are necessarily unqualified. It's either, if it's a no decision, I haven't sold the value of this deal to the enterprise sufficiently because I don't know enough to do that. I don't know enough of the metrics of the business to say this thing pays for itself in 4 days. If I don't even make that argument because I don't have that information, that's a reason for a customer to do nothing. And then the other one is just comparative. We a lot of sales books think of and talk about sales as if a person is selling in a vacuum, but you're selling against some number of competitors, right? And the customer doesn't have time to deal with 4 or 5 or 6 vendors. They're trying to skinny it down to two or 3 that have the highest likelihood of being a successful partner with them, who they trust, etc. And so if you haven't demonstrated that sort of level of understanding, then you may lose the deal, but somebody else might win it. So, and you might not know that till the very end. I lost this deal 3 months ago and I don't know it yet. And I keep applying resources and I keep, trying to win this deal, but I'm the outsider looking in still. Very difficult to win a deal that way.
Living in the land of hope.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. So Brent, could you bring one of those up and we can, because we got a few minutes left here. How do you see discovery changing and what's the impact in a product-led growth journey?
Well, I love this topic. I'm going to be brutal. if it's truly product-led growth, then you don't need discovery. Let me take a simple example of this. A number of years ago, back around 2000, I was managing a large team that included a bunch of engineers, and the head of engineering came to me and said, "We need a bunch of copies of our favorite CAD software, SolidWorks." I said, "Great. How many copies do you need, and roughly what's it going to cost?" And he gives me that information. I said, "Great." And I called up a sales rep at SolidWorks and said, "I need 12 copies of SolidWorks. What's the best price you can give me? And I want to make sure that I get, the right version and the right modules." That was it. That was it. That was the conversation. What I'd like to do is differentiate. Here I'm buying a tool. I already understand what it is, what it does. I've got the value equation. I just need more of it, or I need it, if you will. I'm just buying a tool. Versus I want to buy an ERP system that's going to be the backbone for my entire business over the next 15 years. That I want to have deep discovery conversations with the vendor, with the salesperson, technical staff, the implementation staff, the customer success staff, because I'm basing my entire business on the success of this backbone. So product-led growth, I don't think if it's truly product-led, if it's Calendly or something like that, there's no need for discovery. So does that help? I think we can take that off the page.
Yeah, I mean, I will add one comment that we've seen a lot lately from a PLG world that it's moving towards more hybrid sort of sales process. So there's a track that's everybody that's PLG, but there's an ideal customer profile that drops out and goes into the sales team. So I would assume that would fall into your regular discovery process when that happens. Does that sound reasonable?
That's a fair statement. And in the book are some sections about doing discovery for transactional sales cycles. And I would say that this falls into that, where you've got somebody who's needs some level of discovery, needs some demo, but not a lot of either in order to feel comfortable to move forward with a decision. So there's always it is definitely going to be a spectrum. There's no doubt about it.
And it seems like too that a lot of that may very well be looking for the gaining understanding of that customer, so you can look for the opportunity to expand once they actually are used successfully, which is a different thing.
Now there's a subtlety here that's really important, and that is the comment that customers today or prospects come into the engage with a vendor, whatever it is, 67% of the way through their process, whatever the number is, but way late. And there's an assumption, which I believe and I know is incorrect, that the prospects know everything they need to know about the vendor's offerings.
Yeah.
And that's incorrect. The prospect doesn't know what they don't know. The vendor has only released information to the public domain that they feel comfortable doing so because competitors and everything else. That's the information the prospect has. So one aspect of discovery, whether or not it's PLG or any growth or any offering, discovery to make sure you understand what does a prospect not know about that they need to know about in terms of forming a full and complete solution. Does that resonate?
That ties into a study that I've been doing routinely since about 2015, a buyer behavior survey. And one of the questions we ask every year is, when do you normally contact a sales rep? And 68%, last year's study, 68% said they contact the salesperson once they've made a decision on what they're going to buy. Well, of course, that sort of messes up your one loss for one thing, but that's a scary thought, and particularly with what you just said, that okay, but I still have to do some discovery, because that doesn't necessarily mean they understand everything about what you're doing and it'll actually solve their problem.
And I'm working with a customer who will remain nameless right now, but they shared a handful of discovery conversations with me, and each of them were effectively the following. The prospect said, "Hey, I'm familiar with you. I have a few questions," which were then answered. And then the prospect effectively said, "I need a discount." I mean, right at the very beginning. So it was exactly. And not a single conversation called discovery in these cases had any discussion of value. not a lick of value. And so the result is, and I should comment that in every single one of these conversations, the reps were caving immediately to the request to, from the prospect to provide a discount. Is interesting to me. This particular offering is far and away the best in the field. Prospects clearly wanted it over, and they were displacing competition. But it turned into a negotiation discussion, a discounting discussion that was phrased as discovery. So that's a terrific example where discovery's value can reduce or even eliminate, or in some cases, upsell the prospect's impressions originally of, oh, I've got a budget of $50,000. That's all I'm going to have. You're going to have to, and I need you to sharpen your pencil and drop down from that. Well, yeah, before we talk about price, dear prospect, let's talk about, your use cases, how many folks, how long, what are you going to gain, et cetera. And then the equation changes.
Yeah. Well, so unfortunately, I could keep this going all afternoon, and I know Pete, you probably agree with me. This is fun, so I'm would be happy to keep going, but I suspect our audience will be a little bit annoyed if we go for a couple more hours. So I'm going to say that's all the time we have today. But Peter, I really, really appreciate you joining us today. Really good insights. Really helped us, I think, get a better handle around this idea of discovery as a process through the whole sales engagement. So Peter, you survived the hot seat. If you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, you let us know, because we'd love to hear from you. And that's your hot seat episode for today. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Michael Fauscette.
And I'm Pete Smith. Thank you very much.